Welcome back to the Cinema Wave podcast. It is I, your host today, Vinny Albano, and I am joined with Zach Miller.
How we doing, man? How we doing?
We're doing good. We're doing good. I'm excited to talk today because we're talking about Shogun, the last 5 episodes of this epic miniseries that has finally concluded on FX. It is a banger. I mean, from our previous 2 discussions where we talked about episodes 1 and 2, and then episodes 3, 4, and 5, we've had a lot of praise for the show, and I think coming out of episodes 6 through 10, same output. I adored this show from beginning to end. A completely riveting ride with some of the most precise filmmaking I have seen at a television level, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, let's just dive in. Let's dive in. Get some brief summary. What do you think of the ending or the later half of this series?
Yeah, it's been a while since we did an episode coverage on this, so we're doing episode 7 to 10. Brief summary and just final thoughts too. But the show as a whole, like everything was so consistent, episode to episode, week to week. There was just so much mystery and this ominous feel to the world of Japan and this time period that they set up, and uncertainty to all of their futures, and they show that through the filmmaking in and out, like all over. So I really appreciated the stylistic choices that they made for the show. And then when you weave the storylines that they did in and out of the show, like there was many points where you just have a buildup of John's storyline and then Mariko's storyline. Then you have a lot with Toranaga, and then you have even moments with Butaro. And then there is the play of religion in the show. Then there's power struggles. Like there was so much that I feel like other shows have tried to do in the past, but this one balanced it perfectly. They handled the arcs of the characters very perfectly, and how the effects of their actions rippled onto each other. So I really respected the fact that they were able to balance all of that in just 10 episodes of a miniseries, and everything was closed off pretty clearly by the end. Like you understand there's what comes after, but the way that they decided to give a finale to the show was respectful to how they portrayed it. But yeah, so what do you think about how the show was represented with the time period? Is this something that you would like to see more of with this era of Japan or another era in the world, or just balancing the storylines and that kind of thing? Because I know we initially started to think of it as like a Game of Thrones style, but with real world situation.
Yeah, no, I would totally be interested to see more of kind of like historical drama from FX. I would totally be excited to see more historical dramas from FX. And I know off camera we discussed the possibility of the showrunners adapting James Cavell's other novels that don't focus on Japan but are in the East Asian kind of saga of the early feudal era. I know his next book after this talks about the opioid trade in early 1800s China, I believe.
Wow.
I could be wrong on that, but that's totally something I would love to see. Totally something I would want to see more of from FX and the showrunners behind Shogun, because it's just so interesting, and what they've been able to put here, I can only imagine what they're going to be able to do with other stories and other period pieces of this nature. However, it also brings into question too, is Shogun so good because of the people we have here? Like, I know Hiro Sanada was producer on the show, but he was also, he plays Toranaga. He's in front of the camera a lot of the time. He's behind the camera a lot of the time. And I watched the behind the scenes of how he's so meticulous, and it really showcases how great of an actor he is, but also how great of a producer he is. He was over every line of dialogue, over every little costume and movement to make sure it was all historically accurate. And he's also a man he's born and raised Japanese, so he knows the culture, he knows the tradition. So going into maybe another series, right? Let's say they do adapt James Cavell's next novel. Would it be as good if we don't have someone akin to Sonata? You know what I mean? But I mean, I know I've kind of talked a lot on this, kind of going in all different sorts of directions. But I think composing my thoughts, simply yes, I would like to see other time period TV shows on this nature, because this blew everything I think that's come before it out of the water.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah, I think the way that they were able to adapt such a time period to this in a limited format, and then also have a regard for the subject matter and the subtext of probably what is in the book. I haven't read the book yet, but I would like to, because I think a lot of the running themes in this show too also are things that we can relate to, not necessarily in the extremities of, suicide and, the customs that they were used to back then, but the act of loyalty and how far you're willing to go for someone's loyalty and allegiance. And then also, living lives with meaning. And there's the constant struggle between all of them of living a full life or having a loyal means to an end with Toranaga, and just feeling like there is a cause behind it and a purpose behind it, and that they're willing to literally either kill themselves or die for someone else in battle. And I think there's something incredibly compelling about that. And then it shows throughout all of the show. So when you're like asking an audience to buy into that as well too, you're seeing like through the lens of John's perspective too, like he's the first person experiencing this type of custom, and we're also along the ride with him on that, and we're like, wow, these people are really willing to die for their actions or be so respectful, or if they commit something disrespectful, they have to die for that, that kind of extremity. So I really was blown away by that and the handling of that. I haven't seen that done really in lots of shows. I know Game of Thrones does it a little bit with how, loyalty and kings and queens and, allegiances for banners and that kind of sense. But, there's more of a approach to the purpose behind each of their lives, and they develop each of the characters super meticulously too. So I really do appreciate what they were striving to come about with the story. And all of, to kind of go along with what you're saying too, the creatives attached, like Hiro Sonata, he's such a powerful person on screen, and like for him to have that care and development into this story, it was definitely what made it so resonant and impactful for everybody. And I think had they not taken the time to do the research or give it that care, it would have just been a very formulaic show, and it wouldn't have had that subtextual theme. We also found out too that they had been developing the show since 2019, and that means that FX, it's been in FX's hands, so they took the time to carefully look over what was going to be the best format to write the scripts, to build the adaptation of a time period. And then, you can feel all of the emotional beats of the storyline. I think that's something I really commend them for, is everything was so thought out with all of the characters' responses to one another. But so I guess FX too, like where do you think FX has a place, like in HBO, Netflix? Like FX is finally, I would say, making a name for themselves in the last like 3-4 years at least too, and this is just one of their pinnacle shows now that I will revisit constantly. But like, where do you think that FX lies in making limited series? Like, do you think they're on a good trajectory now and they're stepping up to that HBO level, or do you think that they still have a ways to go? But I think FX is right up there. So
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, we saw The Bear, right? Which is I can gush about The Bear all day.
Mhm.
That's like that show. I don't want to get too off topic.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know, The Bear is so fucking good. I love that show so much. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, and that's FX. And now, right now after. And also, The Bear is acclaimed. It's gotten so popular, especially after the release of season 2. And it's acclaimed now. It won a whole lot of awards.
Yeah.
So then, right after that, we're getting this Shogun. And this is most definitely going to get a whole lot of awards. I'd probably be a little salty if it does not.
I will be too.
Yeah, same. Like, it deserves it. It deserves it. And you could tell how much passion and how much great filmmaking was put behind this show. So I think FX, especially now with their partnership with Hulu and how streaming services are the new wave. Yeah, I think that in a handful of years, we're going to keep seeing more and more big shows from FX like this, to the point where they're going to become HBO level. They're going to become The Sopranos and Game of Thrones and House of Dragon and Entourage and all these huge shows that came from HBO that we're going to see here from FX. I totally agree. I think that's a valid future.
And I'm actually going to backpedal a little bit because I just looking at their catalog now, I feel like it kind of started with Sons of Anarchy and Justified, and then it gets into the Americans, Atlanta. Then there's
Atlanta too. Love Atlanta. We have the poster.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think our audience can see it on camera, but
yeah. And then American Horror Story's been on forever. People have been loving that. Then you have Fargo, Snowfall, the American Crime Story series they've been producing as well. So I'm even going to go out on a limb too and say that they're like the A24 of television or limited series. And then when they have these series, they seem to just have very original stories, especially for TV at least. And FX is still technically a cable network. They do things that are unconventional for, like, they're almost like the earlier version of AMC, but I think they go a couple steps further, at least in the terms of stories that they tell. And they also have a little bit more mature subject matter most of the time. And then there's also like Always Sunny that's been around forever. The new Welcome to Wrexham. These are shows that are for mature audiences most of the time, and then they also just care about the creative side of it. I feel like they have done a great job at developing the creators and making sure that they get the care for their own projects in that kind of way. So I think it is going to be more of like in HBO as the years go on, and I think we're right there already. So they've really built up a great catalog of stuff. But going back to the show too, so let's get into 9 and 10, like the episodes 9 and 10.
Okay, all right.
Because there's a couple of big moments that we can't really recap everything in the time we have, but building up to 9 and 10 is where everything hits the fan. You know, like Shogun goes haywire after that, and it's a great conclusion. But do you want to talk about episode 9 in particular, because it was one of your favorites?
Yeah, I would love to. I think that episode 9 was just once again, like, I'm gonna sound like a broken record by the end of the episode. Once again, just a pure example of precise filmmaking from the writing department and the technical department. Everyone in front of the camera and behind the camera from beginning to end, and that building of tension to then the climax of that episode where are we talking about spoilers or
yeah, we can get into spoilers.
So that climax of that episode where we get the death of Mariko, and just, it is brutal. You have Shinobi and invading the quarters, And that whole episode too, just kind of let's take it from the beginning. Like I mentioned, they're building that tension. We have Mariko finally takes Toranaga's initiative of like, all right, I'm going to obey you, my lord, and I'm gonna show Ishido and the Council of Regents that they don't have the power here.
Yeah.
And it's all mind games. So it's a little hard to kind of formulate what we saw on screen into words almost, because it's not as simple as, oh, they fight. No, this is a chessboard match. This is, Toranaga and Ishido and Mariko being that pawn of Toranaga as he maneuvers it around the chessboard, for Mariko to basically go to Osaka and be like, hey, Ishido, you have no say over the hostages here. I serve my lord Toranaga, so I am allowed to escort, Toranaga's wife and the other woman who I'm forgetting her name, out of here. Ishido's like, no, right? He's being caught on his bullshit.
Yeah.
And with that, Mariko is assertive. She's assertive this entire episode, and it's building that nail-biting tension. We see her stand up in front of all the nobles, in front of Ishido, in front of Lady Ochiba, and say to them, like, I'm not, like, basically like, hey, I'm not listening to you. And you get like a whole room of gasp and ahs. She then, the next morning, tries to force her way out of there. Ishido's men are trying to stop her by force, saying you don't have permits. Gets into a battle. She's fighting with her own hands, with her own spear, fighting her way. And that ends up ultimately, due to the fact that she was unsuccessful at serving her lord Toranaga, she requests seppuku. And that scene for me was nail biting, because it's building up and it's a slow, somber scene where she's going to take her life in front of her own son, in front of everyone. And then we see Blackthorne. He takes the role as her second. She's about to do it. Ishido walks in, throws permits on the ground, and is like, here's your permits you so wanted. Like, you had to threaten your own suicide for this.
Yeah.
But then, in the end of the episode, because he didn't want to be caught on his bullshit, he goes back around and sends Shinobi to try to kill her.
Yeah.
And just that whole play of events from the beginnings of the episode to that happening, and what an epic scene that also was, with obviously Yabushige being the guy to let these shinobis in, a traitor.
Yeah.
He's always, and I want to talk about Yabushige in a little bit, because I really loved him in these last few episodes because of how much of a snake he really was.
Yeah.
But he, that right there was just, it was great. It was a French kiss, or a chef's kiss.
Yeah.
Not French kiss. Yeah. So I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah, that was my thoughts.
It was really well done, because the whole tension behind her too was just the fact that she was willing to use herself as an inspiration to other people to start the rebellion, and just Ochiba even says to Ishido, if you kill her, everyone's going to take up arms against you. But if you let her go, then everyone's going to also request the same thing. So like, you're backed into a corner basically. So he decides to choose the latter and, have her killed by assassins, whether he was trying to covering it up or not. But he knew that she was going to die. And also, it's very similar to the same effect of Toranaga's son, even though he meant to kill his brother-in-law, like for betraying him as well. His son's death gave him time of mourning for him to escape in that 50 days and retreat away from the men. So his death also had a purpose. Mariko was also trying to die for purpose. Even in the episode before, Hiromatsu his closest advisor, his closest friend, commits seppuku. So, and Toranaga is unwilling to yield to that, and he had to convince his own men and convict his own men that, you know, that there was a rumor that he was going to surrender in that way. So all of their lives played a part. And although I would agree, I would probably say that they was not morally correct. You know, like you're letting these people die. That's what John is also low key the moral compass to us the whole time. He's like, this is not okay. You know, like this is not normal behavior. He's kind of manipulating you and taking advantage of your loyalty, which he is. But he has to also compel his followers because they're so used to these extreme situations. So I think that's really compelling for us as well, is you know, that they are literally all willing to die for the cause and the greater good of Japan. Even Ishido is saying that as well, is like, we have to kill Toranaga for the greater good of Japan and the realm, you know, that kind of way. And Toranaga is unwilling to fully breach Osaka with Crimson Sky as the mission because he knows it would cause so much death and carnage. He knows even himself that he would pass away too. So he can't sacrifice like probably thousands, millions of lives for the greater good of Japan because he knows that it would tear itself apart if that happened. So he decides to send in Mariko and inspire that change. And I thought that was incredible. And she had been looking for her whole life for that purpose because of the exile she was thrown into with her father's past and him being so like outcasted and his reputation being ruined. All she was ever looked after was a you know, just a throwaway like wife. Butaro takes her in, that kind of thing. She had no role to fulfill anymore, but she takes this upon herself and is also consulting with John. So she feels that same level of being an outcast with John, and I think that's also what brought their romance together. So when John even sees that was the case of like her death inspired and incited the rest to happen, all of the dominoes fall and he understands it, but he also doesn't necessarily agree with it, which I really like. And I thought that was a beautiful way to end the show too. Was just, it was so bittersweet. And the, you know, we were talking about too how we were surprised that the last episode had a lower rating, and I think people really anticipated this massive big conflict battle, you know, as we've normally seen. So I don't know what the book is like, but I'm assuming it stayed true to the book. However, it only shows more of a testament to Toranaga's character, that he played every piece so carefully, and he was willing to do that before letting even more people die. But he tried to do it at the lowest risk possible, I guess. But you know, these are all his closest people in a sense. So it was really crazy to see how a lot of extra things had to happen to avoid a massive war in that way. Because the season, he alludes to what will come to Yabushige. He goes, you know, all of the regents will meet up in battle, but Ochiba will be so compelled by Mariko's death that she will rescind the heir's army to Ishido, and he'll have no banner to fly. So everybody will kind of turn on him, or they won't have to engage in the conflict. So for him to do that with just one person's death, well, and then, you know, there's other people involved, but like with the lowest risk is pretty unbelievable, especially the fact that this happened in history too. Like, it's pretty insane. So I mean, this was just such an era of history that I was so interested in. And you know, the fact that they were able to give us insight into Toranaga's character and all these other major players was pretty phenomenal. So
and just piggybacking off of that, like episode 10 and that last episode, I could definitely see people like you mentioned, like people are going to expect like an epic war, like a battle of the bastards type of deal. But no, this is more than that. This is, from every episode before this, it has been a political thriller in and out, and it is mind games, and it is a game of intelligence. Like I mentioned, the chessboard, and we see in that monologue with, sorry, excuse me, we see in that monologue with Toranaga talking to Yabushige, and we see his true intentions and how, like you mentioned, he was the master plan behind everything. You know, to the point where, you know, he was very conniving. He was very he was changing and manipulating things that even we as the audience didn't know at first, like Johnny, or like burning John's ship.
Yeah.
And basically like keeping him in Japan for who knows how long, forever.
Yeah.
And that is so interesting. It's so fascinating. Also, like at the beginning of the series, he's claiming, oh, I don't want to be Shogun. I don't want to be Shogun. You know what I mean? Trying to put on this front, but it's revealed that he's going to take the air of Shogun. And then after all, this was all just setting up the stepping stones for him to get there.
Yeah.
So it is so interesting. I want to also talk about that final monologue and what we see and how he talks about the future. Because in the book, that those armies meeting at the battlefield is actually an epilogue. Wow. I found it very interesting that they like combined the epilogue in this monologue with Toranaga. How in the book, at least to my understanding from what I read online, it is like, you know, like chapter ends, epilogue, and then they all meet up in the battle and it tells the story there. But we see it through this monologue with Yabushige, which I found interesting. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that? Or?
I liked it too because he kind of Yabushige was, you know, before he commits seppuku. Toranaga's almost saying like, you know, everything that you did to try and undermine me isn't going to happen. I think it's a good use of it because he's telling him like, in a matter of words, like, you know, things worked out according to plan. You just didn't know the plan because if I told you everything, things would have went sideways. So I think that's another part. And his there was even a part earlier in the show where he kind of is telling his son of just like, you know, you don't have to tell everybody everything in a matter of words. Like he said something else, but it was just like not showing everyone your cards, especially because he's in such a position of power, and the fact that he can't trust anybody. You know, like there's very few people that he can fully trust throughout the whole show. So for him to like tell Yabushige in his last moments, like everything went according to plan. Even throughout the show, he's like saying the engine is so predictable, Yabushige is so predictable, like that kind of thing. He's almost like dangling it over his head, but he's not taunting him. He's just kind of saying like, I won, you know, like things are, because Yabushige thinks that there's so much yet to come still, and he's like, no, everything fell into place. It just hasn't happened yet in that way. So I really like that. And then I also feel like it was deserved more because he was the one that like was the hammer that fell on Mariko. So he kind of deserved it. I actually thought John was going to just like cut his head off, like not even give him the chance to do seppuku if he found out that Mariko was killed because of him, you know. But I liked his death being, you know, he got what he deserved because he's like Littlefinger, you know, in that sense. So like, what did you notice was the comparisons between like Littlefinger and him?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Yabushige because I remember we compared him to Littlefinger in our first episode. He's out for himself. Yeah. From that first episode, he was like, oh, I'm going to take that pirate ship and I'm going to give it all to Ishido, all the guns and whatever John had on that boat. I'm going to give it to Ishido because then Ishido is going to want me. And then, hey, you know, you want to be, he's always wants to be on the more powerful.
The winning side.
The winning side. And we see that throughout this entire series. And we see that when he betrays them, and that's eventually why he ends up being ordered to commit seppuku, because he's the one that agreed with Ishido and then let the shinobi to assassinate Mariko.
Yeah.
And I honestly think he was my favorite part of this later half, especially these last 3 episodes, because the performance that Tadanobu Asano puts on he's great. He's just great. Yeah. And he's like Littlefinger in that conniving nature, but he's also kind of a fool. He's very abrasive and loud, and he makes a fool of himself. And you see that in Asano's performance. He does a great job of having comedic moments, but also having like these moments of just like, wow, like you're such an asshole,
Right.
And I really enjoyed watching that. I think that his character, like I mentioned, was my favorite part of these last 3 episodes. And yeah, it was really cool to see. It was cool to see.
Yeah, I think he was one of my favorite pieces of the show too, because he was, like you said, out for himself. He was unpredictable. Like I always kind of had the idea that he would turn on either Ishido or Toranaga at some point. I just didn't know the timing of things and what was going to entice him to switch. But it was always he was an enjoyable character to watch, because like, especially in terms of a story structure, you don't want to always know the next move of a protagonist or an antagonist, So I like that he would give us surprising things where he would seem loyal, and then he would go flip on a whim to just like be on the other side just to get ahead in that way. And I really like that, but I definitely didn't expect him to be involved in the final plot. I thought that he was not going to die with Toranaga. I just thought he would run instead of caving to Ishido once more. But yeah, it really just showed to his character that he didn't change, Like, he wasn't willing to really be loyal to anybody. And I think that's why he was such an outlier and he popped out from the rest of the people in the show. And same thing with his demeanor. Like, he was very less formal than the rest, like he was just calling his nephew an idiot all the time, and he was like calling John like just a stupid engine all the time and that kind of stuff. So it was like he would definitely lash out easier than the rest, along with Butaro too. So I really liked the endings that were given to the characters, and even John. Like, I really liked his ending. They gave us a little flash forward to his age.
So I will say, I was listening to the podcast that FX, that is not actually, but that's not real.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's like all dream.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But it's still interesting because it's like, it's that imaginary, of John, that could be a reality.
Yes.
But it doesn't come to that in the end, because Toranaga says how he believes John's fate is that he will never leave Japan.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's why I want to read the book too. Like, like, this is so good with how they ended it. But there are little bits I would like to know more, and then what came after with the English coming to Japan. Like, how consistent was that, and what was Toranaga's peaceful rule like? Because that's kind of, I looked up something about like his rule was like one of the most peaceful rules of feudal Japan, and I think it was like 300 to 500 years or something like that. And then you were mentioning too, he decides to move the capital and the power structure of Japan to Edo, which is present day Tokyo, which was really cool when you told me that. So I was like, this stuff, for it to really happen, and then to compare it to like how the structure of a country that we're familiar with is today, and to see how someone's effects or a group of people's effects had such a long lasting way of happening to the rest. Like, it's pretty crazy. So yeah, it's wild.
I do want to go back a little bit, talk about episode 6. And personally, so that episode, albeit, don't get me wrong, a highly rated episode. It has an 8.2, but still the lowest out of all the episodes. And I had a feeling that it was going to be the lowest going into it because I feel like audiences were going to be caught off guard with the subject nature of that episode.
Yeah.
But I personally found that episode one of the most interesting, and I want to talk about it for a few reasons. It is an episode that opens up and we're finally revealed Mariko's backstory. She grew up with Lady Ochiba and they grew up like sisters, yet their fathers were enemies. And there's a long, deep-rooted history with that. But seeing that, and then also seeing the conflict between her and John in this episode, and how, you know, they're really persistent on giving John a courtesan for that episode, in which that ends up happening, and they go to the tea house, and he has a night with a woman. I forget the character's name, but she continually shows up. And I don't know, I found the perspectives in that episode really interesting. You know, we're focusing a lot of the episode through a womanly perspective, seeing the courtesans, seeing Mariko's story. Also, not to mention, it's probably one of the most beautiful episodes. Shout out to the cinematographer Mark Liaberte. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. It is beautiful. Like, one of the first shot of like the flashback sequence is like, holy shit! Like, this is this is awesome to look at. I just found that really interesting. And then as we go into episode 7, which is a stick of time, and following the courtesans, they continue. But what I found really interesting in this episode was that was it 7 or 8? But either way, even if it is the death of Toranaga's son, which you mentioned before.
7.
7? I know you mentioned 7. Before the death and how that allowed Toranaga the time to escape. But I want to talk about his like death as a whole, because it's shocking.
It was shocking.
It was out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And what is your thoughts on that? May it be episode 6 and the courtesans and Mariko's backstory, or Toranaga's son?
Yeah, I really liked that shock factor of 7, because you know, Psyche is Toranaga's brother-in-law, I believe, because they say half brother, so I'm assuming it's
I'm not sure if like because you know the words and how they, you know, for
like the formality.
I don't know if it was like his actual like half brother, if they had like a different mother or father, but I'm not sure.
I couldn't tell if it was like a clan thing either, but basically Toranaga reluctantly calls him in to be another ally after his army gets wiped out. So he calls him in, and then it turns out that Psyche had an offer to basically take in Toranaga as hostage, because Ishido got to him first. And basically Toranaga's son is like one of the most outspoken people, and so he tries to get a band of people that follow him to kill Psyche and his men in that kind of way, because they're surrounded. So I really liked that, you know, that shock factor of another person dying for Toranaga, and I was definitely happy that there was one person that he was definitely impulsive about it, but he was like willing to just go into battle. He wasn't going to take it and commit seppuku, you know. Like, I think that also would have gone against his character and the way that they had presented him, because he was impulsive, and he was, I mean, he killed the other people with the cannons too, so he was willing to like cause bloodshed in the end for Toranaga. And you know, he ends up getting killed by slipping on a stone, but that was, you know, it was still like definitely good shock factor. It was good to see that somebody stood up for Toranaga physically. And it was a great mic drop to end that episode. And then you get into episode 8. Mariko like denounces herself from Butaro. She's like, I don't want to be together. John Yu's reunited with his men briefly, accusing him of, pushing to Japan for his own glory in that kind of way. They were like, we shouldn't even be here still in that sense. But yeah, so I really, I mean, 8-2 is probably like, I love that episode. Like you love 6, I love 8 too. I love like Hiromatsu and how he killed himself. Like that was crazy. Like that was so well set up too, because Toranaga had to convince his own men that he was going to surrender and let word spread that one of his closest advisors like killed himself. So he had to convince every person that he was in defeat, and he it was another chess move, So that was like so crazy to me. And then he doesn't even go to his son's funeral, which was another sense of defeat. He's like, I'm gonna not appear there because I'm sick, and also because I feel defeated. So he did every little step to portray that he was a defeated. It was so good. It's so good. And then that like those 2 episodes are so important for the next 2, 9 and 10. That's why I agree with you. Like the last half of it, everything in the beginning was great, but everything unravels. But you feel like it's unraveling, but Toranaga had a plan the whole time, and I thought that was brilliant. So
you literally said it better than I could ever. That was incredible. And like as you were saying it, like it made me realize too the impact of the loss of life here.
Yes.
Like from Hiromatsu to Mariko, like it's so you feel the impact as an audience just as much as the characters in this world and in this story feel it. I don't really have much else to say.
I was gonna say that's a good way to wrap it up too. But just like how the whole, I feel like the running theme of this show is the purpose of life, and there's even another great shot with John in I think 9 or 10 where he sees the stones laid out, and there's all the paths of the stones like raked out. He just decides to put his finger in it and drag it across. And I was thinking about like why they would include that. And to me, it said, that he disrupted fate for them. Like everybody's fates were drawn in the rocks in that kind of sense. And he's the master of his own fate, I think, by disrupting that. Like it's more of a visual subtext to it. So I thought that was another way of just saying like life is in your control, and I think that's the characters also thinking about that. And Mariko, even at points, is always going back and forth. And there was another great bit of dialogue where John is like, all right, well, if you won't live for Toranaga, you won't live for God, will you at least live for me? And I think that really finally gets through to her. And after all of this hardship that she's gone through, he finally breaks the mold on her and is like, this is like life is meant to be lived, and it's not always about a purpose for another person. It's about living for yourself at points too. I really liked the juxtaposition of each extreme in the show with that theme. So, and it really like reflects on the audience well too, to make your own conclusions. But
that was excellently said. I think the dichotomy of these characters and each of their own motives and just everything going on, it's just so well done. Shogun has impressed me. I am a nerd for like political thrillers. I loved Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, although the ending of Game of Thrones gave a bitter taste in my mouth. And Dune really was scratching that itch, but for me, Shogun filled that hole that I was missing ever since long ago with the ending to Game of Thrones. But we shall not talk about that.
Give me scores.
So let's get into scores. I'm gonna give this a solid 9 out of 10. What about you?
I'm gonna give it a 10.
Okay.
And I think it's and there's nothing wrong with a 9 either. I think there's definitely some highs and lows of the show. I think the low points are not bad though. Like it's all like in a very top echelon of well-made filmmaking. Like there's bad shows of True Detective that I despise, you know, like there's bad episodes of that show, and that's bad. Like that's peaks and valleys. But this is like when it's low, it's still not low. You know?
Not at all.
So I think 9 is still fair. But 10, I'm just gonna be like, I don't know. There was a lot that spoke to me, and I was very impressed that they didn't just go with a war samurai epic and just leave it to bloodshed. Like they had so much more fulfilling bits of it about the themes and everything else that was tied into it. And then, you know, it was just so well crafted down to the costumes, the cinematography, the art direction, everything. Like it was so good. So,
no, I echo that point. It's some of the most precise filmmaking, and I think years from now people are going to be looking upon this miniseries as the golden standard, as this is like, okay, this is the way you do costume design, this is the way you do a time period accurate setting, and on top of that, from the filmmaking and the cinematography and the acting, just I think it's just going to be that show that people are going to look back on as the gold standard. I think for me, 9 out of 10, I'm reluctant to give it a 10 just because I want to revisit some things. And upon my revisit, I might bump it up to a 10. But I don't see me going any lower than a 9. So that should tell the audience if you I mean, I figured you get this far into the video, we're talking about spoilers, but you know, to ricochet the idea of how good this show really is. But anyhow, wrapping it up, I would like to say, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give us a like and subscribe, and also comment down below to continue the discussion. We want to hear your guys' thoughts on Shogun, as it has been a long and epic ride. Also, you can follow us out on Instagram, where our handles are at CinemaWave Media and _Culture Wave Media. We're also on TikTok and Threads, where you can find us at CinemaWave Media, and on Facebook under Culture Wave. So, it has been I, Vinny Albano, and
I'm Zach Miller. Thanks for having me, man.
Of course. Well, I mean, we're in this together, but
we're all part of the wave. We're all part of the wave.
And audiences at home, if you enjoyed this, feel free to join the wave. It has been an awesome discussion. So long.
This is the culture.